Blizzard had been raging for 6 standard cycles now, and knew his mining operation was in serious trouble. Standing at the reinforced viewport of Mining Station Theta 7, he watched the swirling white death that had transformed the normally harsh but manageable planet of 442C into an absolute nightmare. The temperature readings on his wrist display showed -47 degrees Celsius and dropping. Even for a world that never saw temperatures above freezing, this was extreme. Had been the foreman of this remote tungsten mining operation for 3 years. At 42, he was built like a barrel, with calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of decades working in hostile environments. His crew of 18 miners trusted him completely, and he had never let them down. But this storm was unlike anything in the planetary records. The mining station sat on a plateau overlooking the valley system, where massive tungsten deposits made the brutal conditions worthwhile for the Terran Mining Consortium. The facility was designed to withstand the planet's notorious weather, but the current storm was testing every system they had. Power consumption was at maximum as the heating units worked overtime, and their supply shuttle wasn't due for another 2 weeks. "Boss, we've got movement on the perimeter sensors," called out the station's communications officer. Her voice carried an edge of concern as she stared at her monitoring station. "Something big, and there's more than one of them." Frowned and walked over to the sensor array. The storm was playing havoc with their equipment, but the thermal readings were unmistakable. Multiple large life forms were approaching the station from the east, moving against the wind. That was unusual behavior for any of the local fauna, which typically sought shelter during storms like this. "Distance and heading?" asked, leaning over shoulder to study the display. 200 meters and closing. They're moving directly toward the main entrance, replied, adjusting the sensors to get a clearer reading. "I count at least 8, maybe more. They're big, boss, bigger than anything in the local wildlife database." Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. 442C was supposed to be uninhabited except for some small scavenger species and the hardy ice moss that grew in the thermal vents. The planet had been surveyed extensively before the mining operation began, and nothing this large had ever been detected. "Get everyone to stations," ordered, his voice calm despite the growing concern in his gut. "Activate the defensive perimeter and bring up the external cameras. I want to see what we're dealing with." The mining station's crew sprang into action with practiced efficiency. They had drilled for various emergencies, though most scenarios involved equipment failures or geological instabilities rather than unknown wildlife. The defensive perimeter consisted of sonic barriers designed to deter the planet's known scavenger species, along with high-intensity floodlights that could be activated to create a protective zone around the facility. As the external camera feeds came online, felt his breath catch in his throat. The beings approaching the station were unlike anything he had ever seen. They moved on 4 legs like wolves, but they were massive, easily the size of Earth bears. Their fur appeared thick and silvery blue, almost metallic in the harsh light of the floods. But what truly caught his attention were their eyes, which reflected the light with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. "My God," whispered Dr. Sarah Martinez, the station's geologist, and she had appeared its shoulder drawn by the commotion. "Those aren't animals. Look at the way they move, the formation they're maintaining. That's tactical positioning." The pack had arranged itself in a loose circle around the station's entrance, but they weren't attacking or even showing signs of aggression. Instead, they appeared to be huddling together against the storm, their massive forms pressed close to the station's walls, where the building provided some shelter from the wind. "They're freezing," Dr. Martinez observed, pointing at the thermal display. "Look at their core temperatures. They're barely maintaining life signs. This storm must have caught them away from their normal shelter." Studied the readings more carefully. The creature's thermal signatures were indeed dropping steadily, and their movements had become sluggish. Whatever these beings were, they were in immediate danger of death from exposure. The storm that was merely inconvenient for the humans in their heated station was clearly lethal for these creatures. "Recommendations?" asked, though he already knew what his conscience was telling him to do. "Protocols say we should maintain defensive positions until we can contact the survey team," offered the assistant foreman. He was a good man, but strictly by the book. "We don't know if they're dangerous." Dr. Martinez shook her head. "Look at them. They're not here to attack us. They're here because our station is the only shelter for kilometers in any direction. They're desperate." Through the cameras, they watched as one of the smaller creatures collapsed. The others immediately moved to surround it, sharing their body heat, but it was clear that their efforts weren't enough. The fallen creature's thermal signature was fading rapidly. Made his decision. Open the cargo bay doors. "Boss, are you sure about this?" asked, his voice tight with concern. "If those things turn aggressive." "Then we deal with it," replied firmly. "But I'm not going to watch sentient beings freeze to death outside our door when we have the power to help them. Open the cargo bay and set the temperature controls to 15 degrees. That should be warm enough to save them without being so hot it causes problems." The cargo bay was the largest space in the station, typically used for storing raw tungsten ore before shipment. It could easily accommodate the entire pack with room to spare. More importantly, it could be sealed off from the rest of the station if the situation went bad. As the massive cargo doors began to slide open, the pack's reaction was immediate and surprising. Instead of rushing forward or showing signs of alarm, they remained perfectly still. The largest of the creatures, a magnificent specimen with scars across its muzzle that spoke of age and experience, stepped forward alone. "It's testing the situation," Dr. Martinez breathed. "The Alpha is making sure it's safe before exposing the pack." The Alpha moved slowly toward the open cargo bay, its head raised and nostrils flaring as it tested the air. When it reached the threshold, it stopped and appeared to be listening. Then, in a gesture that sent chills down spine, the creature looked directly at the camera and dipped its head in what could only be described as a bow. "Did it just?" started to say, but her words trailed off as the Alpha turned and made a series of complex vocalizations toward its pack. The sounds were unlike anything in the database, melodic and clearly structured like language. The pack responded immediately. They moved with careful precision, the stronger members assisting the weaker ones as they made their way into the cargo bay. The creature that had collapsed was carefully carried by two others, their coordination speaking of long practice and deep bonds. Once inside, the pack arranged itself in a defensive circle with the injured and young in the center. But they made no move toward the inner doors of the station. They seemed to understand instinctively that they were guests and should not venture further without permission. "Temperature in the cargo bay is rising steadily," reported Tommy Wu, the station's environmental systems specialist. "They should be out of immediate danger within the hour." Nodded, but his attention was focused on the Alpha, who had positioned itself closest to the inner doors. The creature's intelligent eyes seemed to be studying the human facility with obvious curiosity, but there was also a wariness there that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. "Dr. Martinez, I want you to start a full analysis of everything we can observe about them," ordered. "Behavior patterns, physiological data, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with, and I want constant monitoring of their condition." "Already on it," Dr. Martinez replied, her scientific excitement barely contained despite the unusual circumstances. "Their physiology appears to be adapted for extreme cold, but this storm pushed even their limits. The good news is that their thermal signatures are already stabilizing." As the hours passed, the crew found themselves fascinated by their unexpected guests. The pack's behavior continued to display remarkable intelligence and social organization. The injured member was tended to constantly by the others, who took turns sharing body heat and what appeared to be grooming behaviors. The Alpha never moved from its position near the inner doors, maintaining what was clearly a guard duty. Occasionally, it would make soft vocalizations toward the pack and began to suspect they were witnessing sophisticated communication. "They're not just intelligent," Dr. Martinez reported after several hours of observation. "They're demonstrating complex social structures, language, and even what appears to be medical knowledge. Look at how they're treating the injured one. That's not instinct, that's learned behavior." The implications were staggering. If these creatures were truly sentient, then 442C wasn't an uninhabited world suitable for mining. It was home to an intelligent species, and the entire operation would need to be. But found himself less concerned with corporate implications and more fascinated by the beings themselves. There was something noble about the way they carried themselves, even in their desperate state. The Alpha's dignified bearing, the pack's obvious loyalty to each other, their respectful behavior as uninvited guests in the human facility. As the storm continued to rage outside, realized that this encounter was going to change everything, not just for the mining operation, but for humanity's understanding of life in the galaxy. These creatures represented first contact with an intelligent species, and it was happening in the cargo bay of a remote mining station. The Alpha suddenly lifted its head and fixed with a direct stare through the camera. For a moment, human and alien regarded each other across the vast gulf of species and evolution. Then the Alpha did something that made its heart skip a beat. It pressed one massive paw against its chest, and then extended it toward the camera in what was unmistakably a gesture of gratitude. Found himself smiling despite the monumental implications of the situation. "You're welcome," he said quietly, though he knew the creature couldn't hear him. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the planet. But inside the cargo bay, two species had taken their first tentative steps toward understanding each other. Had made a simple human choice to offer shelter to beings in need, and that choice was about to open doors to possibilities he had never imagined. The pack settled in for the duration of the storm, and knew that when it finally passed, nothing would ever be the same. First contact had happened not through grand diplomatic missions or military encounters, but through an act of simple compassion on a frozen world at the edge of human space. As he watched the aliens rest in the warmth and safety of the cargo bay, couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this universe might hold, and what role humanity might play in the broader community of intelligent life among the stars. Dawn on 442C brought an eerie silence that had learned to associate with the end of major storm systems. The constant howling of wind that had battered the station for days had finally ceased, leaving behind a crystalline stillness that made the mining facility feel like a ship floating in space. Stood in the observation deck, watching the first pale rays of the system's distant star illuminate a landscape transformed by the blizzard. The cargo bay environmental sensors showed that their guests were stirring as well. Dr. Martinez had maintained her vigil throughout the night, documenting every aspect of the pack's behavior and physiology. Her preliminary reports painted a picture of beings far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined possible on such a hostile world. "Their injured member is showing remarkable improvement," Dr. Martinez reported as joined her at the monitoring station. "Whatever treatment methods they're using, they're effective. And boss, I think you need to see this." She pulled up thermal imaging from the cargo bay showing the pack's current positions. During the night, they had arranged themselves in a complex geometric pattern that was clearly intentional. The Alpha remained at the center, but the others had positioned themselves in what looked like concentric rings with specific spacing between individuals. "It's not random," Dr. Martinez explained, her voice filled with excitement. "They've created a mathematical formation. Look at the angles and distances. This shows understanding of geometry, spatial relationships, and group coordination that rivals human capabilities." Studied the display with growing amazement. The pattern was indeed precise, almost artistic in its execution. But what truly caught his attention was the way it maximized heat distribution while maintaining clear sight lines to all exits and entrances. It was simultaneously beautiful and tactically sound. "There's more," Dr. Martinez continued, switching to the acoustic monitoring feed. "They've been communicating throughout the night. I've identified at least 47 distinct vocalizations with clear patterns of repetition and response. This isn't just noise, boss, it's language, complex, structured language." The implications hit like a physical blow. These weren't just intelligent animals seeking shelter. They were people. Alien people with their own culture, language, and sophisticated understanding of mathematics and tactics. And they were trapped on a world that humanity was strip mining for tungsten. "Have you contacted the consortium yet?" Dr. Martinez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Shook his head. "Communication array is still down from the storm. It'll be at least another day before we can send a message, maybe longer, which gives us time to figure out how to handle this." The truth wasn't eager to contact the Terran Mining Consortium. He had worked for corporate interests long enough to know how they would react to the discovery of intelligent life on 442C. The best-case scenario would involve years of bureaucratic delays, while committees debated the legal and ethical implications. The worst case would involve a cover-up and the quiet relocation of the mining operation to avoid bad publicity. Neither option addressed the immediate reality that these beings were clearly native to the planet, and had as much right to be here as anyone else. Probably more right than the humans who had arrived with massive excavation equipment and terraforming technology. A soft chime from the cargo bay monitoring system interrupted his thoughts. The thermal sensors were showing increased activity among the pack, and the external cameras revealed the reason. The Alpha had risen and was moving toward the cargo bay entrance, not in a threatening manner, but with obvious purpose. "It knows the storm has passed," Dr. Martinez observed. "They're preparing to leave." Felt an unexpected pang of loss at the thought. Over the past day, he had found himself genuinely fascinated by these beings. There was something profoundly moving about their obvious intelligence and dignity, the way they had maintained their social bonds even in crisis, their respectful behavior as guests in the human facility. "Boss," called from the communications station, "I'm picking up some interesting readings from the valley below. The storm cleared out a lot of the atmospheric interference, and our long-range sensors are getting much better resolution than usual." Walked over to station and felt his breath catch as she brought up the enhanced geological survey display. The valley system, which they had assumed was nothing but frozen wasteland dotted with tungsten deposits, was revealed to be something far more complex. Geometric structures were visible beneath the ice and snow. Not natural formations, but clearly artificial constructions that extended deep into the valley floor. Roads, or what appeared to be roads, connected various nodes in a pattern that spoke of urban planning. And throughout the entire complex, thermal signatures indicated active energy sources. "My God," whispered Dr. Martinez, who had joined them at the display. "It's a city, an entire civilization, and we've been mining right on top of them." The scale was staggering. The underground complex extended for kilometers in every direction, with what appeared to be multiple levels connected by sophisticated transportation networks. The thermal readings suggested a population in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. "The tungsten deposits," realized with growing horror. "They're not natural, they're refined metal. We've been strip mining their infrastructure." The full implications of the situation began to dawn on everyone present. The Terran Mining Consortium hadn't discovered valuable natural resources on an uninhabited world. They had invaded an alien and begun systematically destroying an advanced civilization's cities to extract the metals from their buildings and machinery. A new sound from the cargo bay drew their attention back to the immediate situation. The Alpha was making a series of complex vocalizations that seemed different from the communication patterns they had observed earlier. The sounds were more formal, more structured, almost ceremonial in nature. "It's trying to communicate with us specifically," Dr. Martinez said with certainty. "Those aren't pack communications. The tonal patterns and repetition structures suggest it's attempting to establish contact with a different species." Made another decision that would have horrified his corporate supervisors. "Open an audio channel to the cargo bay." "Boss, are you sure?" asked nervously. "We don't know what kind of response that might provoke." "They've been nothing but respectful guests for over 24 hours, replied. "If they wanted to hurt us, they've had plenty of opportunities. Open the channel." As the communication link activated, the Alpha's vocalizations became immediately more focused and directed. The creature was clearly aware that it was now being heard by the station's occupants. It continued its formal-sounding communication for several more minutes, then fell silent and waited. "It's waiting for a response," Dr. Martinez breathed. "It understands the concept of two-way communication between species." Felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. He was about to become the first human to attempt direct communication with an alien intelligence. The words he chose in the next few moments might well determine the future relationship between humanity and this species. "Hello," he said simply, speaking into the communication system in as calm and friendly a tone as he could manage. "My name is, we gave you shelter from the storm." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Alpha's head snapped toward the speakers with obvious recognition that the sounds were a response to its communication. After a moment, it began a new series of vocalizations, but these were different again. Simpler, more repetitive, as if it were trying to match the basic pattern of greeting. "It's learning," Dr. Martinez whispered in amazement. "It's analyzing your speech patterns and trying to adapt its own communication accordingly." For the next hour, found himself engaged in the most extraordinary conversation of his life. It was frustrating and wonderful in equal measure. The Alpha demonstrated remarkable ability to recognize patterns and adapt its vocalizations, while experimented with different tones and simple phrases to see what might translate across species barriers. Gradually, a primitive but functional communication system began to emerge. The Alpha, who had begun thinking of as ambassador, seemed to understand concepts like gratitude, identity, and basic emotional states. When gestured toward himself and repeated his name, Ambassador responded with a complex vocalization that seemed to serve the same function. Dr. Martinez was frantically taking notes and recording everything for later analysis. "Boss, this is unprecedented. We're establishing first contact protocols in real time. The implications for a loan are staggering." But was less concerned with scientific implications and more focused on the immediate moral crisis they faced. How could he explain to this intelligent, dignified being that humanity had been unknowingly destroying its people's cities? How could he convey the need to stop the mining operations without causing a panic among his crew or alerting the consortium before he had time to develop a proper response? Ambassador seemed to sense his distress. The alien's vocalizations took on a softer, more reassuring tone, and it moved closer to the speakers in what appeared to be a gesture of comfort. The creature's emotional intelligence was remarkable, its ability to read human body language and tone, despite the vast differences between their species. Then Ambassador did something that changed everything. It moved to one of the cargo bay's viewports and looked directly out at the valley where the mining operations were located. When it turned back toward the camera, its expression was unmistakably sad but not angry. It made a series of gentle vocalizations that somehow conveyed understanding and forgiveness. "It knows," realized with a shock. "It knows what we've been doing and it doesn't blame us." Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes with wide eyes. "That's not possible. How could it know?" "Because its people have been watching us for 3 years," said, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "They know exactly what our mining operation is doing, and they chose not to attack us. They chose to try to coexist, even while we were unknowingly destroying their homes." The magnitude of the aliens' restraint and compassion was staggering. A less mature species might have responded to the human presence with immediate violence. These beings had instead observed quietly, perhaps hoping that the humans would eventually realize the situation and choose a peaceful solution. Ambassador moved back to the speakers and began a new communication sequence. This one was longer and more complex, with clear emotional undertones. Dr. Martinez worked frantically to analyze the patterns, but found that he was beginning to understand the alien's meaning on an intuitive level. "It's telling us about its people," said quietly, "about their history, their losses, their hope for peaceful contact." As the communication continued, felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a mining foreman dealing with an unexpected encounter. He had become humanity's first ambassador to an alien civilization, and his decisions in the coming days would determine whether that relationship began with friendship or tragedy. Ambassador completed its narrative and waited patiently for its response. The alien's eyes held intelligence, dignity, and hope. Despite everything humanity had unknowingly done to its people, it was still willing to extend trust and seek peaceful coexistence. Thought about his crew, about the consortium's expectations, about the mining operation that was his responsibility. Then he looked at the being who had shown such remarkable grace under impossible circumstances, and he made the only choice his conscience would allow. "We're going to fix this," he said aloud, both to Ambassador and to his crew. "Whatever it takes, we're going to find a way to make this right." Ambassador's response was a sound that needed no translation. It was gratitude, hope, and the beginning of friendship between two species who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. The real work was just beginning, but knew that humanity had been given a precious gift, the chance to prove that they could be worthy neighbors in a universe full of wonders they were only beginning to understand. 6 months later, stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed Harmony Station, watching an impossible sight unfold in the valley below. Where once massive mining excavators had torn crude wounds in the frozen landscape, now humans and worked side by side in an operation that had become the greatest cooperative venture in human history. That was what they called themselves in their own melodic language, though Ambassador had learned to pronounce human with remarkable accuracy. The word meant those who endure in their complex linguistic system, and had come to understand that it represented far more than just a species name. It was a philosophy, a cultural identity built around survival, adaptation, and hope in the face of overwhelming challenges. Dr. Martinez approached, carrying her ever-present data tablet filled with linguistic analysis and cultural observations. Over the past months, she had become the station's unofficial, documenting every aspect of society with the enthusiasm of someone living their greatest dream. "The morning coordination meeting is about to start," she said, her voice carrying the excited energy that had come to associate with their new reality. "Ambassador and the Engineering Council are ready to present the final fusion reactor designs." Nodded, still amazed at how quickly their world had changed. When the Terran Mining Consortium had finally re-established communication with the station, had been prepared for the worst. Corporate executives didn't typically respond well to news that their most profitable mining operation had been accidentally built on top of an alien civilization. The conversation with CEO Elizabeth Hawthorne had indeed been heated, but not in the way had expected. Rather than anger at the disruption to mining operations, Hawthorne had been furious that the initial planetary surveys had missed such an obvious sign of intelligent life. "Do you have any idea what kind of legal and public relations nightmare this creates?" Hawthorne had demanded during their emergency video conference. "If word gets out that we've been strip mining an inhabited world, the consortium will be finished. Every mining operation in human space will be subject to new regulations and oversight." But had been prepared for that response. During the weeks it had taken to re-establish communications, he had been busy. Working with Ambassador and the Leadership Council, he had developed something unprecedented, a genuine partnership that could benefit both species while solving the consortium's problems. "Ma'am," had said calmly, "what if I told you that instead of a disaster, this could be the greatest opportunity in human history? What if instead of hiding our mistake, we could turn it into humanity's first successful alliance?" The proposal had been audacious. Rather than abandoning the 442C operation, suggested transforming it into a joint venture. The possessed advanced understanding of cold weather engineering and sustainable energy systems that had allowed them to build their underground cities. Humanity brought industrial manufacturing capability and access to interstellar trade networks. Together, they could create something neither species could achieve alone. A model for peaceful cooperation that would establish new standards for human expansion into the galaxy. The negotiations had been complex, involving not just the consortium, but also the Terran Colonial Authority and several interstellar regulatory bodies. Dr. Martinez's linguistic work had been crucial in facilitating communication, as had Ambassador's remarkable ability to understand human psychology and motivation. But perhaps the most important factor had been the Sohn proposal. Rather than demanding compensation for the mining damage, they had offered to share their advanced cold fusion technology in exchange for help expanding their underground cities and access to off-world markets for their sophisticated art and craftsmanship. The fusion technology alone was worth more than a century of tungsten mining. They had developed clean, efficient energy systems that could revolutionize human space colonization. Their understanding of sustainable engineering in extreme environments could solve problems that had plagued human expansion for decades. Entered the main conference room, where the morning coordination meeting was already in session. The sight still amazed him every time. Humans and worked together around a circular table designed to accommodate both species' physical needs. Translation software provided real-time language conversion, though many participants had learned enough of each other's languages to communicate directly. Ambassador looked up as entered, the alien's expressive eyes brightening with what had learned to recognize as pleasure. Over the months, they had developed a genuine friendship that transcended species barriers, possessed a dry sense of humor that translated surprisingly well across cultural boundaries, and his insights into problem-solving had proven invaluable. "Foreman," said in his carefully pronounced English, "we were just reviewing the fusion reactor installation timeline. The engineering integration is proceeding ahead of schedule." Dr. Sarah, the consortium's new director of operations, nodded approvingly. She had replaced the station's previous corporate liaison after demonstrating remarkable aptitude for cross-species diplomacy. The preliminary energy output tests exceeded all projections. If these results hold, will be able to power not just the joint operations here, but provide clean energy for the entire system. Took his seat and reviewed the data displays showing the current status of their various projects. The transformation had been remarkable. Where once they had crude mining operations, now there was a sophisticated complex that combined human industrial capability with environmental harmony. The underground city expansion project had created living spaces that were marvels of both engineering and art. Architects had designed flowing, organic spaces that maximized thermal efficiency while creating environments that felt alive and welcoming. Human engineers had provided manufacturing capability and materials science that allowed construction on a scale they had never imagined possible. "There's something else we need to discuss," said Commander Lisa Park, the Terran Colonial Authority representative who had arrived 3 weeks earlier. "The Senate Commerce Committee has officially approved the 442C Partnership Protocol. You're no longer an experimental program. You're now the official template for future human contact with intelligent species." The implications were staggering. Everything they had learned about cooperation, every protocol they had developed, every success and failure would now guide humanity's approach to contact with other alien civilizations. Felt the weight of responsibility, but also tremendous pride in what they had accomplished. Made a sound that recognized as laughter. "So we are no longer the strange experiment of desperate beings seeking shelter from a storm." "You were never that," replied firmly. "From the moment you entered our cargo bay, you were people in need of help. Everything that followed came from treating each other with dignity and respect." Elder Ra, the senior representative, spoke in the melodic tones of their language. The translation software rendered her words. "The young Foreman speaks wisdom that some of our own people required time to accept. There were those among the deep councils who questioned the wisdom of revealing ourselves to the Starwalkers. Had learned about the internal debates among the leadership. Not all of them had supported its decision to seek shelter at the human station. Some had argued for maintaining their hidden existence until the humans eventually departed. Others had advocated for more aggressive action to protect their cities. The fact that they had chosen cooperation over conflict spoke to a philosophical maturity that found both humbling and inspiring. They had evaluated the situation, weighed their options, and chosen the path that offered the greatest benefit for both species, even though it required tremendous trust and risk. "The morning reports from the manufacturing sector show excellent progress," reported engineer, who had become the liaison for the joint industrial projects. "The metallurgy techniques are allowing us to produce alloys with strength characteristics we've never achieved before. The applications for spacecraft hull construction alone could revolutionize space travel." Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes. "Speaking of applications, I've been analyzing the cultural exchange programs. We now have 12 humans learning advanced mathematics and 8 studying human terraforming techniques. The knowledge transfer is accelerating beyond all projections." The cultural exchange had been one of the most surprising successes of the partnership. Both species had discovered that their different approaches to problem-solving complemented each other remarkably well. Humans tended toward bold, direct solutions that prioritized speed and efficiency, favored elegant, sustainable approaches that emphasized long-term stability and harmony with environmental conditions. Together, they were developing hybrid methodologies that combined the best aspects of both approaches. The results were innovations that neither species would have achieved independently. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Commander Park activated the communications system, and CEO Hawthorne's image appeared on the main display. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had spent months defending an impossible proposition and finally seen it vindicated. "Ladies and honored friends," Hawthorne began, "I'm pleased to inform you that the United Earth Senate has just voted to ratify the cooperation accords. The 442C partnership is now protected by interstellar law, and the principles you've developed are being incorporated into the Earth Colonial Constitution." Felt a surge of emotion that caught him by surprise. They had done it. What had begun as a simple act of compassion during a storm had grown into something that would shape humanity's future among the stars. Stood and performed the graceful gesture that had learned was the equivalent of applause. The other followed suit, creating a harmonious display that somehow conveyed both celebration and solemn acknowledgement of the moment's significance. There's more, Hawthorne continued. The science expedition has detected what appear to be artificial energy signatures near sea. If they prove to be indicators of intelligent life, your protocols will guide first contact procedures. Foreman, I'm authorizing you to select and train the contact team. The meeting continued for another hour, covering routine operational details and planning for expanded cooperation programs, but found his attention drifting to the viewports, where he could see humans and working together in the valley below. Children from both species played together in the environmental domes, their laughter translating across all barriers of language and biology. Human engineers learned sustainable construction techniques from masters, while artisans experimented with human tools and materials to create new forms of expression. After the meeting, found himself walking through the corridors that connected the human and sections of the station. The architecture itself represented their partnership, flowing design principles implemented with human engineering precision, creating spaces that felt both familiar and wonderfully alien. "Do you ever regret it?" asked as they paused at a viewport overlooking the Joint Operations Center. "That day when you chose to seek shelter with us instead of waiting for the storm to pass?" Was quiet for a moment, his reflective pose indicating deep thought. "Among my people there is a saying, the storm that drives you from your planned path may lead you to a destination beyond your dreams. When we approached your dwelling that day, we sought only survival. What we found was something far more precious." "And what was that?" "Hope," replied simply. "For countless generations, my people survived by hiding, by enduring, by making ourselves small in a vast and dangerous universe. You showed us that it was possible to stand tall and walk together with others toward a larger future." Smiled, understanding exactly what his friend meant. Humanity had been alone in the galaxy for so long that many had begun to assume they always would be. The discovery that intelligent, compassionate life existed among the stars had changed something fundamental about humanity's sense of purpose and possibility. "What do you think comes next?" asked. His expression took on the quality that had learned indicated optimism. "Your people and mine have proven that cooperation across species barriers is possible. We have created something new in the galaxy, a template for friendship between very different forms of life. When you meet the next species, and the one after that, you will know how to extend the hand of partnership rather than the fist of domination." As they stood together watching the bustling activity of their shared project, reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate pack seeking shelter from a storm had become the foundation for humanity's greatest achievement, proof that the universe was vast enough for everyone, and that the differences between species could be sources of strength rather than barriers to overcome. The storm that had driven them to his door had indeed passed. In its wake, it had left something beautiful, the beginning of a community among the stars where cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect could flourish. Had offered shelter to strangers in need, and in return he had received something beyond price, a glimpse of what humanity could become when it chose compassion over fear, partnership over domination. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders still waiting to be discovered. But now humanity would not explore it alone. They would walk among the stars with friends beside them, building bridges of understanding that would endure long after the memory of winter storms had faded into legend.